That conversation stayed with me for days. I began paying closer attention to the sounds, noting their timing and duration. The footsteps were deliberate, measured, as if someone was pacing while deep in thought. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like furniture being moved, a chair scraping against the floor, or the soft thud of something being set down. I decided to investigate. The next afternoon, I knocked on Mr. Henderson's door at his house across town. He answered wearing a cardigan despite the warm weather, his eyes darting nervously when I explained my concern about possible intruders in the vacant unit. "Impossible," he said, wringing his hands. "I have the only keys, and the place has been sealed up tight. Old buildings make noises, you know? Settling foundations, temperature changes, that sort of thing." But his explanation didn't account for the other incidents that had begun occurring. Small things at first, easily dismissed as forgetfulness or coincidence. My apartment key would be in different pockets than where I remembered leaving it. Books on my shelf would be rearranged slightly, not obviously, but enough that I'd notice when reaching for a familiar title. The thermostat would be adjusted to temperatures I never set. One evening, I came home from grocery shopping to find every cabinet door in my kitchen standing wide open. I stood frozen in the doorway, bag still in hand, staring at the strange sight. I was absolutely certain I'd closed them all before leaving, as I always did. It was one of those automatic habits, like locking the door or turning off lights. I set down the groceries carefully and walked through each room, checking for signs of a break-in. Nothing was missing or obviously disturbed. The windows were still locked from the inside. The door showed no signs of tampering, and my laptop and other valuables remained exactly where I'd left them. Yet the open cabinets felt like a message. Though I couldn't understand what it meant, sleep became increasingly difficult. Even with earplugs, I'd wake to the sound of movement above my bedroom. The pacing seemed more agitated some nights, faster and more erratic. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was pipes or settling wood. But pipes don't walk in patterns, and settling wood doesn't maintain such precise timing. I started keeping a journal, documenting each incident with dates and times. The entries grew longer and more detailed as the occurrences became more frequent and harder to explain. Lights would flicker when no storm was approaching. The old radiator would clank and hiss, even though I kept it turned off. Most unsettling of all, I'd sometimes catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. A shadow passing by a doorway, or the suggestion of a figure standing just outside my bedroom window. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in October. I was working late on a client project when I heard the footsteps begin their nightly ritual. But this time, they didn't stop after 20 minutes. They continued for over an hour, growing more frantic and urgent. Then, suddenly, absolute silence. I saved my work and crept toward my front door, pressing my ear against the wood. The hallway outside was quiet, but I could swear I felt a presence on the other side, as if someone was standing just inches away, listening just as intently as I was. My hand trembled as I reached for the deadbolt, though I couldn't say whether I intended to lock it or unlock it. That's when I heard it, so faint I almost missed it. A whisper, barely audible through the door. My name, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize, followed by words I couldn't quite make out. The sound sent ice through my veins, and I backed away from the door so quickly I nearly tripped over my coffee table. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my door. Written in unfamiliar handwriting, it contained just 4 words that made my blood run cold. Part 2. The note read, "You're not supposed to be here," in careful, old-fashioned script. The paper felt aged, with slightly yellowed edges and a texture that reminded me of vintage stationery. I turned it over several times, looking for any other clues, but found none. My hand shook as I photographed it with my phone before carefully placing it in a plastic bag, though I wasn't sure why I felt the need to preserve evidence. I called Mr. Henderson immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining about the note and requesting an urgent meeting, trying to keep my voice steady despite the panic building in my chest. When he hadn't returned my call by noon, I decided to drive to his house again. This time, no one answered the door. The windows were dark, and several days' worth of newspapers lay scattered on his front porch. A neighbor working in her garden next door noticed me standing there and walked over, wiping dirt from her hands on a small towel. "You looking for Harold?" she asked kindly. "He left town suddenly about a week ago. Said he had a family emergency. Back east. Seemed pretty shaken up about something." My stomach dropped. "Did he mention when he'd be back?" She shook her head. "Didn't say, just asked me to keep an eye on the place." "Is everything all right, dear? You look pale." I managed to think. And returned to my car, mind racing. Henderson's sudden departure felt too convenient to be coincidental. I sat in his driveway for several minutes, trying to piece together a logical explanation, but kept coming back to the same unsettling conclusion that something was very wrong with my apartment building. That evening, I decided to research the building's history. I spent hours online, searching through city records, newspaper archives, and real estate databases. What I found made my unease deepen considerably. The Victorian house had been converted to apartments in 1987, but its history before that was surprisingly difficult to trace. I found scattered references to various owners over the decades, but many of the records seemed incomplete or contradictory. The most interesting discovery came from a local newspaper article from 1983. The headline, "Read, Local Woman Missing After Domestic Dispute." The article was brief, mentioning that Patricia Wilde, age 34, had disappeared from her home on Elm Street after neighbors reported hearing an argument. The address matched my building exactly. Police had investigated, but found no evidence of foul play, and Patricia was never located. I printed the article and studied the grainy black and white photograph of Patricia. She had dark hair and wore a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Something about her expression seemed familiar, though I couldn't place where I might have seen her before. Sleep was impossible that night. Every sound seemed amplified, from the old radiator's settling groans to the wind-rattling windows. Around 2 a.m., I heard new sounds from upstairs. Not the usual pacing, but what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor. Heavy scraping noises followed by periods of silence, then more scraping. I grabbed a flashlight and my phone, then quietly opened my apartment door. The hallway was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb, casting long shadows that seemed to move despite the still air. I could hear the sounds more clearly now, definitely coming from the vacant apartment above mine. The building had no elevator, just a narrow staircase with worn carpet and a wobbly banister. I climbed slowly, pausing on each step to listen. The sounds continued sporadically, always stopping just long enough to make me question whether I'd actually heard them. The door to the upstairs apartment was painted dark green and had a brass number 3 that hung slightly crooked. I pressed my ear against it and heard nothing. Then, so suddenly it made me jump, something heavy fell or was dropped inside, followed by what sounded like muffled sobbing. I knocked softly. "Hello? Is someone in there?" The sobbing stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt different from the usual emptiness of a vacant apartment. It felt occupied, aware, as if someone was holding their breath just on the other side of the door. I tried the handle, not really expecting it to turn, but it did. The door swung open with a prolonged creak, revealing a dark interior that smelled of dust and something else I couldn't identify. Something organic and slightly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. My flashlight beam revealed a living space similar to mine, but reversed in layout. The furniture was covered with white. Sheets and boxes were stacked along the walls. Everything appeared normal, yet the atmosphere felt charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. I stepped inside, leaving the door open behind me for a quick escape. The floorboards creaked under my feet, the same sounds I'd been hearing. From below, I moved slowly through the rooms, flashlight sweeping back and forth, looking for any sign of an intruder. In what would be the bedroom, I found something that stopped me cold. The sheet covering what appeared to be a dresser had been pulled away, and the surface was covered with old photographs. Dozens of them, scattered across the wood like someone had been sorting through memories. I approached carefully and examined the photos with my flashlight. They were all of the same woman, Patricia Wilde from the newspaper article. Some showed her smiling in what looked like happier times. Others captured her looking worried or sad. In several photos, she appeared to be glancing over her shoulder as if she knew she was being watched. The most disturbing photo was at the center of the collection. It showed Patricia standing in what was clearly my apartment, recognizable by the distinctive molding and window configuration. She was looking directly at the camera with an expression of fear so genuine it made my chest tighten. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside and spun around, my heart hammering. The beam of my flashlight swept across the doorway, but I saw nothing. The footsteps continued past the apartment and up another flight of stairs I hadn't noticed before, leading to what must be an attic or third floor. I wanted to follow, but something held me back. The photographs seemed to be trying to tell me something, but I couldn't grasp their meaning. I took pictures of them with my phone, though the camera flash created harsh shadows that made Patricia's expressions appear even more anguished. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something else. In the corner of the bedroom, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, was a suitcase. It was old-fashioned, made of brown leather with brass clasps, and it looked recently used. A tag attached to the handle bore Patricia's name in the same handwriting as the note that had been slipped under my door. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Patricia hadn't disappeared in 1983. She was still here, somehow, in this building. The footsteps, the moved objects, the whispered words, they were all connected to her presence. But the question remained, was she trying to warn me about something? Or was she the danger I needed to fear? I backed toward the door, no longer caring about making noise. The atmosphere in the apartment had grown oppressive, like the air before a thunderstorm. My flashlight flickered, the beam growing dim despite fresh batteries. As I reached the hallway, I heard my name being called again, but this time from below. The voice was clearer now, definitely female, and filled with an urgency that chilled me. It seemed to be coming from inside my own apartment. Part 3. I rushed down the stairs, taking them two at a time, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. The voice calling my name had stopped, but my apartment door stood wide open. I knew with absolute certainty that I had closed and locked it before going upstairs. The interior of my apartment looked wrong somehow, though I couldn't immediately identify what had changed. Everything appeared to be in its proper place, yet the spatial relationships felt altered, as if someone had moved items just slightly, creating a subtle but pervasive sense of wrongness. I walked through each room methodically, checking for obvious disturbances. In my bedroom, I found the first clear sign that someone had been inside. My laptop, which I'd left closed on my desk, was open and running. The screen displayed a document I'd never seen before, filled with text in the same careful handwriting. As the note, the document appeared to be a journal or diary, with entries dating back several months. As I read, my confusion deepened into horror. The entries described my daily routine in disturbing detail. What time I left for my morning walks, which coffee shop I frequented, what I ate for dinner, even my sleeping patterns. Someone had been watching me, studying me, recording my habits with meticulous care. The final entry was dated yesterday and contained information that made my blood freeze. It detailed my conversation with Mrs. Chen about the empty apartment. Upstairs, my visit to Mr. Henderson, and even described what I was wearing when I came home from grocery shopping. The level of observation was so complete, it felt like someone had been living inside my walls. I scrolled to the beginning of the document, looking for clues about who had written it. The first entry was dated just 2 days after I'd moved in, suggesting that whoever was watching me had started almost immediately. The writing style was formal, almost clinical, as if the author was conducting some kind of experiment or study. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop reading that. You won't like how it ends." I stared at the message, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The text had been sent just seconds ago, which meant whoever wrote it was watching me right now. I spun around, searching my apartment for hidden cameras or some other form of surveillance, but found nothing obvious. Another message arrived. "Check your email." With growing dread, I opened my email app. A new message had arrived from an address I didn't recognize, with no subject line. The email contained a single photograph attachment that took several seconds to load due to its size. When the image finally appeared, I had to grip the edge of my desk to keep from falling. It was a photograph of me taken from inside my apartment, showing me sitting at this very desk reading the mysterious document. The angle suggested the camera was positioned somewhere near my bookshelf, but I could see the entire shelf clearly, and there was nothing there. The timestamp on the photo showed it had been taken less than 2 minutes ago. I immediately called the police, but explaining the situation proved more difficult than I'd anticipated. The officer who took my report was polite, but clearly skeptical. Footsteps from an empty apartment, rearranged objects, mysterious documents on my computer, text messages from unknown numbers. Laid out like that, it sounded like the paranoid delusions of someone under extreme stress. "Ma'am, have you been experiencing any unusual stress lately? Problems at work, relationship issues, financial concerns?" The officer asked gently. I insisted. They send someone to check the building, particularly the vacant apartment upstairs. They agreed to send a patrol car, more to humor me than out of genuine concern. While I waited, I tried calling Mrs. Chen, but her phone went straight to voicemail. The officers who arrived were thorough, but found nothing unusual. They checked the vacant apartment with a key provided by the building management company, which had taken over Henderson's duties during his absence. The apartment was empty, dusty, and showed no signs of recent occupancy. The photographs I'd seen scattered on the dresser were gone, as was the suitcase. "Everything looks normal up there," Officer Martinez told me when they returned to my apartment. "No signs of forced entry, no evidence anyone's been inside recently." "Are you sure you saw what you described?" I showed them the photographs I'd taken with my phone, but the images were completely black, as if the camera had malfunctioned. The mysterious document on my laptop had vanished as well, leaving no trace in my browser history or temporary files. After the officers left, I sat alone in my apartment feeling foolish and frightened in equal measure. Either I was losing my mind or someone was playing an elaborate and cruel game with me. Neither possibility offered much comfort. I decided to pack a bag and stay at a hotel for a few nights, hoping some distance would help me think more clearly. As I gathered toiletries and clothes, I tried to formulate a plan. I could break my lease and move out entirely, but that felt like running away from a problem I didn't understand. Alternatively, I could stay and try to get to the bottom of what was happening, though that option seemed increasingly dangerous. While packing, I discovered something that made me reconsider everything. Hidden in the back of my closet, behind a box of winter clothes I rarely accessed, was a manila envelope with my name written on it in the now familiar handwriting. Inside the envelope were more photographs of Patricia Wilde, but these were different from the ones I'd seen upstairs. These photos showed signs of violence. Patricia's face was bruised in several images, and she appeared to be trying to hide injuries with makeup and careful positioning. At the bottom of the stack was a newspaper clipping I hadn't found in my earlier research. The headline read, "Missing Woman's Apartment Searched Again." The article, dated 6 months after Patricia's disappearance, mentioned that police had received an anonymous tip about possible evidence in her former residence. They'd searched the building thoroughly, but found nothing conclusive. What caught my attention was a quote from a neighbor who'd been interviewed. Patricia was terrified of someone in those final weeks. She kept saying someone was watching her, following her, but the police couldn't find any evidence of a stalker. We all thought she was just being paranoid. The parallels to my own situation were unmistakable. Someone had been stalking Patricia before she disappeared, just as someone was now stalking me. The question was whether the same person was responsible. For both situations, I noticed something else about the newspaper clipping. In the margin, someone had written notes in pencil. The handwriting was different from the careful script I'd seen elsewhere, more hurried and emotional. One note read, "She tried to warn the others." Another said, "The pattern continues." The others. That suggested Patricia wasn't the only victim. I felt a chill as I realized I might be part of a larger pattern, the latest in a series of women who'd been targeted by the same individual. My phone buzzed with another text message. "Hacking won't help. I'll find you wherever you go." This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my bag and ran for the door, not bothering to lock it behind me. As I reached my car, I heard the sound of footsteps from the building, but when I looked back, I saw no one in the windows or doorways. I drove to a hotel across town, paid cash for a room, and used a false name on the registration. The clerk looked tired and didn't ask for identification. I was grateful for small mercies. Safe in the anonymous hotel room, I spread out all the evidence I'd collected. Photographs, newspaper clippings, screenshots of the mysterious text messages. I tried to construct a timeline of events, looking for patterns or connections I might have missed. One thing became clear. Whoever was behind this had been planning for a long time. The surveillance of my activities, the psychological manipulation, the careful removal of evidence before police searches. This wasn't the work of a random stalker or someone acting impulsively. As I studied the photographs of Patricia, I began to notice something disturbing. In several of the images, there were reflections in windows or mirrors that showed parts of another person. The reflections were partial and unclear, but they suggested someone of average height with dark clothing. More unsettling was the realization that, in the most recent photos, Patricia appeared to be trying to communicate something. Her hands were positioned in ways that seemed deliberate, almost like sign language. In one photo, she was pointing toward a specific corner of the room. In another, she held up 3 fingers while looking directly at the camera. I had the growing conviction that Patricia wasn't just a victim. She was trying to leave clues, trying to help whoever might come after her. The photographs, the mysterious document on my computer, even the notes slipped under my door might all be attempts at communication. But if Patricia was trying to help me, where was she now? And why had she chosen such cryptic methods of communication instead of simply approaching me directly? The answer, when it came to me, filled me with a dread so profound I could barely breathe. Part 4. The realization struck me like ice water. Patricia wasn't choosing cryptic communication methods because she preferred them. She was using them because direct communication was impossible for her. The evidence pointed to a conclusion I'd been unconsciously avoiding. Patricia Wilde was dead, and somehow her presence was still bound to that building. I sat on the hotel bed, surrounded by photographs and clippings, trying to process this impossible possibility. Everything I'd experienced, the footsteps, the moved objects, the mysterious messages could be explained as the actions of someone who existed in a state between life and death. Someone trying desperately to warn others about a danger that had claimed her own life. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. The caller ID showed only a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. Sarah? The voice was female, unfamiliar, and filled with static as if the connection was poor. Who is this? My name is Linda Chen. I think you know my sister, Mrs. Chen, from your building. She asked me to call you. Relief flooded through me. Is she? All right. I tried calling her earlier but couldn't reach her. There was a long pause. Sarah, my sister, passed away 3 days ago. Heart attack at the hospital where she worked. I'm handling her affairs. The words didn't make sense at first. That's impossible. I saw her just last week. We talked about the empty apartment upstairs. I'm sorry, but you must be mistaken. My sister died on Tuesday night. She'd been in the ICU for 2 days before that. She couldn't have been talking to anyone about apartments. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the hotel room floor. Mrs. Chen had been dead when I'd spoken to her about the vacant apartment. The woman I talked to in the hallway, who told me about the empty unit upstairs, had been impossible. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. Linda, I need to ask you something. Did your sister ever mention anything strange about our building? Anything unusual or frightening? Actually, yes. In her final weeks, she kept talking about a woman who'd lived there years ago. Someone named Patricia who tried to warn her about something. My sister seemed convinced this Patricia was still around somehow, still trying to protect people. We thought it was the stress from her job, but she was quite insistent. After hanging up, I stared at the evidence spread across my bed with new understanding. Both Patricia and Mrs. Chen were dead, yet both had been trying to communicate with me. They were attempting to warn me about the same danger that had claimed their lives. But what was that danger? Who was the threat they were trying to alert me about? I decided to return to the building that night. If Patricia and Mrs. Chen were both trying to warn me, I needed to understand what they were warning me about. Running away wouldn't solve anything, and it seemed clear that whatever was stalking me wouldn't simply give up if I moved elsewhere. I arrived at the building around midnight, parking a block away and approaching on foot. The Victorian house stood dark against the night sky, with only a few windows showing light from the occupied apartments. My own unit was completely dark, which was how I'd left it. Using my key, I entered through the main door and climbed the stairs to the vacant apartment. The door was unlocked, just as it had been earlier. I stepped inside with my flashlight, immediately noticing that the air felt different. Warmer somehow, and with a subtle electrical charge that made my hair stand on end. The photographs were back on the dresser, arranged exactly as I'd found them before. But now there were additional items scattered among them. A small mirror, an old-fashioned fountain pen, and what appeared to be a letter written on the same aged paper as the note I'd found under my door. I picked up the letter carefully. The handwriting was Patricia's, but the paper felt warm to the touch, as if it had just been written. Sarah, it began. I don't have much time to explain. He knows you're getting close to the truth. The same man who killed me is planning to kill you. His name is David Kellerman, and he's been the building's maintenance supervisor for over 20 years. He has keys to every apartment. He watches the women who live here, studies their habits, then makes them disappear. My blood turned to ice. I'd seen the maintenance supervisor several times over the months I'd lived here. A quiet, unremarkable man in his 50s, who always seemed to be working on small repairs around the building. He had legitimate reasons to be in the hallways at any hour, keys to every unit, and detailed knowledge of the building's layout. The letter continued. He killed me in the basement and buried my body beneath the furnace room. Mrs. Chen discovered evidence of his crimes, and confronted him. He caused her heart attack by drugging her coffee. You're next on his list, Sarah. He's been preparing for months. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, slow and deliberate. They paused at the apartment door, and I quickly switched off my flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. The footsteps resumed, moving past the door and down the hall. Patricia's letter had more to say. He's in the building now, looking for you. He knows you went to the hotel, but he also knows you'd come back. There's a hidden room behind the basement, furnace where he keeps trophies from his victims. The police need to find that room. It's the only way to stop him and put our spirits to rest. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket, then carefully made my way to the apartment door. The hallway was empty, but I could hear sounds from somewhere in the building. Doors opening and closing, footsteps moving from floor to floor. Someone was searching the building systematically. I needed to get to the basement to find the hidden room Patricia had described, but first I had to call the police. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. That wasn't unusual in old buildings, but the timing felt suspicious. Moving as quietly as possible, I made my way down to the ground floor. The basement entrance was accessed through a door near the mailboxes, secured with a lock that looked recently changed. I tried several keys from my keychain, hoping the building master key would work, but had no luck. Behind me, I heard the distinct sound of the main building door opening and closing. Heavy footsteps echoed in the lobby, moving with purpose rather than the casual gait of a resident returning home. Sarah? A male voice called out. I know you're in here. There's no need to be afraid. I just want to talk. The voice was calm, reasonable. Exactly what I'd expect from the mild-mannered maintenance supervisor. But knowing what I now knew about David Kellerman, that reasonable tone was more terrifying than any angry shout would have been. I crept toward the back of the building, looking for another way to access the basement, or at least find a place to hide while I figured out my next move. The footsteps followed, moving methodically through the ground floor, checking each possible hiding place. I know this must all seem very confusing, Kellerman continued, his voice growing closer. But I can explain everything. Patricia was disturbed, you see? She made up stories about me, tried to turn the other tenants against me. I never meant to hurt her, but she left me no choice. I found a door marked utility that was slightly ajar. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down to what must be the basement. I could hear the building's furnace humming somewhere below, along with other mechanical sounds that suggested a larger space than I'd expected. Mrs. Chen believed Patricia's lies. Kellerman's voice echoed from the main hallway. She went through my personal belongings, found things that were meant to remain private. She threatened to go to the police with her wild theories. I descended the utility stairs as quietly as possible, my flashlight beam revealing a basement much larger than the building's footprint should have allowed. The space extended under the neighboring buildings as well, connected by archways that had been bricked up and then reopened. The furnace room was exactly where Patricia had indicated, tucked into an alcove behind the main heating system. As I approached, I could see that the concrete floor in one section looked newer than the rest, as if it had been recently poured. But more disturbing was what I found along the walls. Shelves lined with personal items, jewelry, photographs, pieces of clothing, driver's licenses. Each shelf was carefully labeled with a woman's name and dates. I counted at least 12 different collections, representing 12 different victims spanning 2 decades. Patricia's section was larger than the others and included items I recognized from her photographs. The most recent addition to the macabre collection made my knees nearly buckle. A shelf labeled Sarah Mitchell already contained several of my belongings. A coffee mug that had gone missing weeks ago. A scarf I'd assumed was lost in the laundry. Even a spare key to my apartment. Kellerman had been planning my death for months, just as Patricia's letter had warned. He'd been collecting trophies before even starting his campaign of psychological terror. I photographed everything with my phone's camera, hoping the images would survive even if I didn't. Then I heard footsteps on the utility stairs behind me. I really wish you hadn't come down here, Sarah. Kellerman's voice was no longer reasonable or calm. It carried a note of regret mixed with anticipation that made my skin crawl. This wasn't how I wanted it to happen, but you forced my hand. Part 5. I spun around to face the stairs, my flashlight beam revealing David Kellerman descending slowly, deliberately. He was exactly as I remembered him. Average height, thinning hair, wearing the same type of maintenance coveralls he always wore. What was different was his expression. The mild, forgettable face I'd seen around the building for months now showed its true nature. His eyes held a predatory gleam, and his smile was the practiced expression of someone who'd done this many times before. 12 women over 20 years, he said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Each one thought she was so clever, so careful. But they all made the same mistake you're making now. What mistake is that? I managed to ask, backing deeper into the basement while keeping my flashlight trained on him. They came looking for answers instead of simply disappearing quietly. Patricia was particularly troublesome. She actually tried to leave evidence for the police to find. He chuckled softly. Of course, I cleaned up her little clues before anyone official could see them. I continued backing away, hoping to find another exit or at least something I could use as a weapon. The basement seemed to extend far beyond what should have been possible, with additional rooms and corridors branching off in multiple directions. You've been planning this for months, I said, trying to keep him talking while I searched for an escape route. Planning is what separates me from common criminals, Kellerman replied proudly. Each woman requires a different approach. Patricia was paranoid by nature, so I used that against her. Made her believe she was being watched. Slowly drove her to the edge of sanity before making her disappear. Mrs. Chen was more practical, so I had to be more direct. You murdered her. I hastened the natural process. Her heart was already weak from years of stress. A small amount of the right medication in her coffee simply accelerated the inevitable. He shrugged as if discussing a minor household repair. I'd reached the far end of the basement, where a heavy wooden door stood slightly open. Beyond it, I could see another staircase leading upward. I made a sudden break for the door, hoping to catch Kellerman off guard. He was faster than I'd expected. His hand closed around my wrist just as I reached the threshold, his grip surprisingly strong for someone his age. I swung my flashlight at his head, but he deflected it easily with his free hand. That was Patricia's mistake too, he said, tightening his grip until I dropped the flashlight. She tried to run instead of accepting her fate gracefully. In the darkness, I heard something that made both of us freeze. Footsteps, but not from where we stood. These came from above us, multiple sets of feet moving with purpose through the building. Police. A voice shouted from somewhere upstairs. This is the NYPD. We have a warrant to search these premises. Kellerman's grip loosened, slightly in surprise, and I took advantage of his momentary distraction to wrench free. I scrambled through the doorway and up the stairs beyond, hearing him curse behind me as he followed. The stairs led to a concealed entrance, behind a false wall in what appeared to be the building's main basement. I could hear more clearly now. Multiple police officers moving through the building, their radios crackling with coordinated search instructions.